What if I told you that the most trusted piece of spring fishing advice you've ever heard is likely the very reason you're coming home empty-handed? It sounds crazy, right? We all have those golden rules passed down through generations, the stuff that's supposed to be gospel. But today, we're putting that old-timer's wisdom on trial. We're going to compare it directly against the hard reality of our modern, pressured lakes. I promise you, by the end of this video, you will understand why the playbook your grandpa used might be actively sabotaging your success, and more importantly, what you need to be doing instead. There has been a massive shift in our waters that most anglers are completely ignoring, and it's the key to unlocking the best fishing of the year. So before we dive in, let me know in the comments, what is the #1 unbreakable rule for spring fishing that you've always followed? Let's be clear, this isn't about disrespecting the fishermen who came before us. Our dads, our grandpas, that old guy at the bait shop who always seemed to know something we didn't. Those guys were legends. They learned to read the water in a way that feels almost lost today. They built a foundation of knowledge that we all rely on, and we've heard their advice so many times it feels like instinct. Find the warmest water. Fish the windy banks. Match your retrieve to the water temp. The thing is, this advice was perfected on the lakes of 1970, not the reservoirs of today. The problem isn't the advice itself, it's the context. We continue to follow these rules out of habit, almost like a ritual. We launch the boat and go through the same motions, but the stage has changed. The water is clearer, the fishing pressure is 10 times higher, and even the genetics of the fish are different. It's time to adapt, not by throwing out the old knowledge, but by understanding why it worked then and why it so often fails us now. Let's start with the absolute king of all spring fishing advice. Always, always start on the north bank. You can picture it perfectly. It's that first warm day of the year, the air still has a little bite to it, but the sun feels good on your face. You get to the lake, and without even thinking, you point the boat north. The logic is sound, passed down for generations. That northern shoreline gets the most direct sunlight all day long, especially from the lower winter sun angle. It warms up faster than any other part of the lake. That warmth pulls in the bait fish, and right behind them, the big, hungry, pre-spawn bass. It's the perfect storm. The problem is, everyone on the lake knows this. You pull up to that first cove on the north shore and see 4 other boats already working it over. It's been hit hard since sunrise. The wisdom is so common that it has created its own downfall. Immense, concentrated fishing pressure on the most obvious spots. The old-timers weren't fishing in a flotilla. They often had the whole lake to themselves. That's a luxury we just don't have anymore, and it completely changes the game. So you've joined the crowd on the north bank. You spend an hour casting, meticulously picking apart every piece of cover. You're doing everything right, but the results are disappointing. Maybe you catch a small, aggressive male, but the big females you know should be there are nowhere to be found. Here's what the old wisdom doesn't account for in modern lakes: dramatically increased water clarity. Many of our reservoirs are significantly clearer than they were 40 or 50 years ago. That same sun that's warming the water is also making it incredibly easy for those wary, pressured bass to see your boat, your line, and your shadow from a mile away. A big old female bass didn't get that big by being stupid. She isn't going to sit in 2 feet of crystal-clear, sun-drenched water with boats buzzing by all day. She feels exposed and vulnerable. So while the water temperature might be 1 degree warmer, the lack of security and the constant disturbance from other anglers pushes her out to the first available piece of deeper, safer cover. The perfect spot has become the most dangerous spot from the fish's perspective. What's the modern alternative to just blindly running to the north bank? It's about understanding the principle, not just the location. The old-timers were seeking a slight temperature advantage. They didn't have the sophisticated electronics we have today. Their best tool was the sun. Our best tool is a high-definition graph. Instead of just racing to a shoreline, spend some time idling and using your electronics. Look for those subtle temperature breaks that others miss. It might not be a whole bank, it could be a small, protected pocket on the west bank that gets all the afternoon sun. It could be a shallow, dark-bottomed flat next to a deep channel. The key is to find the temperature anomaly. I've seen days where a patch of water the size of a truck hood is 2 degrees warmer because it's behind a row of dock pilings blocking the wind. That's where the fish will be. You have to think smaller and more specific. The why behind the old wisdom, find the warmest water, is still 100% correct. The where is what has changed completely. It's no longer a massive, obvious bank. It's a specific, often overlooked spot. Let's move on to another piece of gospel. The magic of a specific water temperature. We've all heard it. The bite doesn't really turn on until the water hits 60 degrees, or 55, or 62, depending on who you ask. We become obsessed with that number. We motor around the lake, eyes glued to the temperature gauge on the console, searching for that magical reading. It's as if we expect an alarm to go off the second the display ticks over to that perfect number, signaling the fish to start feeding recklessly. It's a simple, easy-to-follow rule, which is why it's so popular. Imagine you're on the water, it's 58 degrees, and you're not getting bit. It's easy to just shrug and say, well, the water's not warm enough yet. It gives us a convenient excuse, but in reality, bass can't read a thermometer. They don't magically change their entire behavior based on a single degree. This numerical obsession causes us to overlook much more important factors that are actually triggering the fish to move up and feed. The truth is, fish behavior is far more complex than a single temperature reading. 2 factors are often more important than the specific number on your graph: the trend and the stability. Think about it this way. Which scenario do you think is better for fishing? A lake where the water has been stable at 57 degrees for 3 days straight, or a lake where the water temperature just crashed from 65 down to 60 degrees overnight because of a cold front? The number is higher in the second scenario, but the fishing will almost certainly be tougher. Fish, like all cold-blooded animals, value stability. A stable, even if slightly cooler, temperature allows them to acclimate and establish a predictable feeding pattern. A sudden drop, even if the water is still technically warm, will shock them and send them scurrying for deep, safe water to recover. The old-timers understood this as fishing after a front, but the modern angler, fixated on a number, often misses the bigger picture. Are you fishing during a warming trend or a cooling trend? That's a much more valuable question to ask yourself than, is it 60 degrees yet? So the modern approach isn't to ignore your temperature gauge, but to use it as a tool to understand trends. Before you even go to the lake, look at the weather forecast for the past 3 to 4 days, and the next 2. Has there been a consistent, slow warming period with lots of sunshine and stable overnight lows? That's your green light. The fish will be getting more and more active, moving shallower each day, and their feeding windows will be predictable. Conversely, did a big storm roll through yesterday with cold rain and wind? Even if the sun is out now, the lake is still reeling from that shock. The fish will be sluggish, positioned deeper, and you'll need to use slower, more subtle presentations. It's like talking to a person. You don't just ask their age, you ask how they're feeling. Don't just look at the water's temperature, try to understand its mood. This shift from focusing on a static number to a dynamic trend is a huge step toward adapting to the reality of spring fishing. All right, let's talk lures. If there's one lure that's synonymous with spring fishing, it's the spinnerbait. The old-timers rulebook is very clear on this. If it's spring and the wind is blowing, you should be throwing a spinnerbait. It makes sense. It's a versatile bait you can fish at multiple depths. The flash and vibration are great for attracting active fish in stained water, and it comes through cover well. For decades, a half-ounce, white and chartreuse spinnerbait with double willow blades was the undisputed king of spring. Guys would have one rod on the deck with that exact lure tied on from March through May, and they caught tons of fish on it. You can almost hear the advice from an old fishing buddy. Don't overthink it, son. Just find a windy bank and start chunking and winding. Sooner or later, one's going to grab it. This approach worked beautifully when lakes were full of aggressive, unpressured fish that had rarely seen an artificial lure. But times have changed. Why is the spinnerbait or nothing approach so outdated now? Two main reasons: fishing pressure and the evolution of fishing tackle. Today's bass, especially the big ones, have seen a million spinnerbaits. They've been caught and released on them. They've seen them whizzing by their face every windy Saturday in April for the last 10 years. They have become conditioned to them. The lure that was once an irresistible meal has in many cases become a warning signal. Furthermore, the world of fishing lures has exploded. The old-timers didn't have access to the vast arsenal we have today. They didn't have vibrating jigs or hyper-realistic swim baits or spy baits or the dozens of other options that can be more effective in certain situations. Sticking to just a spinnerbait out of tradition is like a carpenter insisting on using only a hammer when he has a whole toolbox full of power tools. It might get the job done eventually, but it's rarely the most efficient or effective choice for the specific task at hand. You are intentionally limiting your potential for success. The modern strategy is all about matching your lure choice to the specific conditions of the day, not just the season on the calendar. Is the water super clear and the sun high? That classic, flashy spinnerbait might be too much. It might spook more fish than it attracts. This is where a more subtle swim bait on a light jig head or even a finesse-style spy bait can be absolutely deadly. Is the water cold and the fish sluggish? A vibrating jig or a bladed jig ripped through submerged grass can trigger a reaction strike from fish that would ignore a steadily retrieved spinnerbait. The key is to have an open mind and a versatile selection of lures. Think about the water clarity, the mood of the fish, and the type of cover you're fishing. The spinnerbait is still a fantastic tool and absolutely has its place, but it's just one tool in the box, not the entire toolbox. Don't let tradition prevent you from tying on the lure that's actually going to get you bit right now. Now for a big one, a belief that forms the very core of spring fishing for so many anglers. In the spring, the fish are always shallow. This is the bank beater's anthem. From the moment the ice melts, the mission is to get the trolling motor down and start pounding the shoreline. Every visible piece of cover, every laydown, every rock, every dock piling is a potential target. The idea is that the base are on a one-way march to the shallowest water they can find to prepare for the spawn. We spend hours with the boat in just a few feet of water, making thousands of casts at anything that looks good. It's an active, engaging way to fish, and when it works, it's incredibly fun. You can see the target, make the perfect cast, and get that explosive shallow water strike. This is the classic spring fishing experience we all dream of, and it's what the old-timers taught us to expect. But what happens when you spend all day doing this and have nothing to show for it? The reason this always shallow mentality fails so often on modern lakes comes back to our familiar culprits: clear water and heavy fishing pressure. Think of the spawning process from the perspective of a big, mature female bass. Her one biological imperative is to successfully reproduce. To do that, she needs a safe, stable environment. The shallowest part of the bank in a clear lake is anything but safe. It's where trolling motors are constantly humming, lures are splashing down every 10 seconds, and predators, both human and natural, can easily see her. So, where does she go? She doesn't just abandon her instinct to move up, she adapts. Instead of moving all the way to the bank, she will stage on the first piece of safe, deep cover she can find adjacent to those spawning flats. This could be a brush pile in 15 feet of water, a rock transition line in 12 feet, or the edge of a submerged creek channel 20 feet deep. She can sit there, safe and secure, and wait for the perfect, stable conditions, usually a few days of warm, cloudy, calm weather, to make a quick dash to the bank, do her thing, and get back out to safety. This means the modern spring angler needs to change their definition of pre-spawn location. You need to stop thinking only about the bank and start thinking about the highway that leads to the bank. Before you ever go shallow, use your electronics to scout the area out from the bank. Look for those secondary points, those offshore humps, and those subtle drop-offs that sit between the deep wintering holes and the shallow spawning pockets. This is where the majority of the big, catchable females will be spending 90% of their time. The guys beating the bank will pick off a few small, aggressive males who have moved up early. You, on the other hand, by targeting these less obvious staging areas, have a chance to find schools of the biggest fish in the lake. It requires more patience and more reliance on your electronics, but the payoff can be the day of a lifetime. The fish are still related to the shallows, but they aren't in the shallows nearly as much as the old wisdom would have you believe. Here's a classic piece of advice that seems to make perfect sense on the surface. In the spring, find the dirtiest water you can find. This wisdom is rooted in two main ideas. First, muddy water absorbs sunlight and warms up faster than clear water. We've already established that warmer water is a good thing. Second, the low visibility gives the fish a sense of security. They feel less exposed and are often more willing to move shallow and feed aggressively. They can't see your boat as well, they can't see your line, and they are more likely to react to the sound and vibration of a lure without getting a good look at it. So we look for the back of a creek where a recent rain has washed in a mudline, and we start fishing, confident that we've found the perfect spring hideout for a big bass. On the lakes of the past, where runoff was mostly organic matter from forests, this was often a winning strategy. But on our modern lakes, especially reservoirs in developed areas, dirty water isn't always a good thing. Today's runoff is different. It often carries agricultural chemicals, lawn fertilizers, and cold, silty clay. This kind of runoff can be so dense that it blocks all sunlight penetration, creating a dark, cold layer on the bottom. Even worse, the decaying organic matter and chemical reactions can suck the oxygen out of the water. You might find water that's a few degrees warmer, but if it's devoid of oxygen and full of pollutants, it's a dead zone. The baitfish won't be there, and the bass certainly won't be either. You can spend hours fishing what looks like a perfect mudline, only to discover it's the aquatic equivalent of a desert. The old rule was too simple. It failed to distinguish between fertile, living stained water and sterile, dead, muddy water. It's a crucial distinction that can make or break your day. The modern, more effective approach is to look for stained water, not muddy water. What's the difference? Think of it like coffee. Muddy water is like espresso, so dark you can't see through it at all. Stained water is like a regular cup of coffee. It has color, but you can still see the bottom of the cup. In fishing terms, you're looking for water with a healthy green or brownish tint, where you have about 1.5 to 3 feet of visibility. This is the sweet spot. This productive stain is created by algae and plankton blooms, the very foundation of the aquatic food chain. Where you have plankton, you have baitfish, and where you have baitfish, you will have bass. This water is still colored enough to give the fish a sense of security and make them bite more aggressively, but it's healthy, oxygenated, and full of life. So next time you're looking for dirty water, don't just look for the mud, look for the color of life. Find that perfect stain and you'll often find the mother lode. Let's talk about color selection. The old-timers' tackle box for spring was pretty simple. When it came to soft plastics, it was black or pumpkin seed. For hard baits, it was something with crawfish red, or the all-time spring champion, chartreuse. The rule was simple. In the spring, you need something bright and aggressive. Tie on something red or chartreuse. The logic was that the water is often stained, and these bright colors stand out. Also, many people believe that bass get aggressive and territorial in the pre-spawn period, and they'll strike a loud, obnoxious color out of pure anger. For years, every crankbait, spinnerbait, and jig had to have a splash of chartreuse or a hint of red on it to even be considered. This simplistic approach can work, especially in dirty water for aggressive fish, but it completely ignores the single most important factor in lure color selection, the local forage base. The problem with the always bright rule is that it assumes fish are reacting out of pure aggression. Sometimes they are, but most of the time, even in the spring, they are feeding because they need to bulk up for the spawn. And what are they feeding on? It depends entirely on the lake you're fishing. Is it a highland reservoir full of crawfish? Then yes, reds and oranges make a lot of sense. But what if it's a lowland lake with a primary forage base of gizzard shad? Those shad are silver and white, maybe with a hint of blue or purple. Throwing a fire engine red crankbait at fish that are dialed in on silvery shad is like trying to sell a steak to a vegetarian. You're not speaking their language. The old-timers often fished the same few bodies of water their entire lives, so their color rules were specific to the forage in those lakes. We, as modern anglers, often fish many different lakes with diverse ecosystems, so a one-size-fits-all color rule is destined to fail. The modern approach is simple, yet so many people ignore it. Match the hatch. Before you decide on a color, ask yourself what the primary food source is for the base in this specific lake at this specific time of year. Are they gorging on crawfish that are just coming out of hibernation? Then your reds, oranges and browns are the ticket. Are they chasing schools of shad or alewives? Then you need whites, silvers and other natural baitfish patterns. Are they feeding on bluegill and sunfish around docks and shallow cover? Then you need something with hints of green, pumpkin and a touch of blue and orange. Sometimes the best way to figure this out is to look in your live well. If you catch a fish, look to see if it spits anything up. Often you'll see tiny crawfish claws or a small baitfish. That's your clue. Let the fish tell you what color to use. It's a much more reliable strategy than relying on a 50-year-old rule about always using chartreuse. Finally, let's look at the old-timers' approach to cover. The classic wisdom was to focus entirely on visible targets. If you can see it, you should fish it. This meant every fallen tree, every stump, every boat dock, and every visible rock pile got a cast. This is how entire generations of anglers learned to fish. You'd work your way down a bank, making precision casts to every piece of fishy-looking wood or rock you could see. It was a visual game, a form of hunting, and it was effective because, in less pressured times, the best and most obvious-looking pieces of cover often held the best fish. There was no need to look for anything else because the fish were exactly where they were supposed to be. That beautiful gnarled laydown tree sticking out from the bank was almost guaranteed to hold a good one. It was a simple, reliable pattern. Today, that most obvious, beautiful-looking laydown tree is a death trap for a smart old bass. Why? Because every single angler who has come down that bank for the past 20 years has thrown a lure at it. It's the most pressured piece of cover on the entire shoreline. The smaller, less educated fish might still use it, but the big, wary females learn to avoid it. They associate that specific spot with danger. The real secret of modern lakes is that the biggest fish often live on the least obvious cover. This is the stuff you can't see with your eyes. It's the small, isolated rock pile in 18 feet of water that nobody else knows about. It's the single stump on a massive, featureless flat. It's the subtle shell bed on a point that doesn't look like anything special from the surface. This is where modern electronics come into play. The old-timers were limited to what they could see. We have the ability to see a high-definition picture of the world a fish actually lives in. The biggest, most unpressured fish live on the cover that other anglers drive right over without ever knowing it's there. So, after all of this, what's the real takeaway? Is your grandpa's advice completely useless? Absolutely not. He was likely a phenomenal fisherman who had mastered his waters in his era. The real lesson here isn't that the old wisdom is wrong, but that our lakes are not static, unchanging museums. They are dynamic, living ecosystems that have been profoundly altered by time, development, and decades of fishing pressure. The most dangerous mistake we can make as anglers is to apply old solutions to new problems without stopping to ask why. That's the real turning point. The why behind the North Bank rule was finding warmer water. Today, you might find that water on a deep rock pile warmed by the sun. The why behind a spinnerbait was flash and vibration. Today, a vibrating jig might provide that in a more subtle, modern package. The core principles of fish behavior, find food, comfort, and safety, have not changed one bit. But the where and the how we find those things have been completely transformed. This shift in thinking changes everything. It frees you from a rigid, outdated rulebook and empowers you to look at the lake for what it is today, to trust your electronics, and to make decisions based on the real-time clues the fish and the environment are giving you. Thank you so much for watching. If this video opened your eyes, do me a favor and hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe for more content that breaks down modern fishing. Now, I really want to hear from you. What's the one piece of old-timers wisdom that you've personally discovered just doesn't work for you anymore? Let's get a great discussion going in the comments below.